Can you hear me?
Yes.
Great.
No.
There we go. I was the one who didn't press share. We'll just wait for Suzy to arrive.
And Suzy can hear us, so can see us in the chat.
Yeah.
Hey.
Can you hear me, Dawn?
Oh, hi, Suzy. Great. So we'll start the session. Welcome to everyone, and thank you so much to the panel for your time and agreeing to participate in this afternoon's session. So this panel is about connecting fashion designers with manufacture. If you have any questions, if you type them into question and answer, and then we'll pick them up as we go. I'm going to ask each of the panel members to present themselves, and then we'll show some images, and then we'll go into question and answers. So today we've got Lee Hurst with us, who's a recent RCA, and he's been involved over the last few months with some of the collaborations from Future Fashion Factory. We've got Suzy Shepherd, who is the co-investigator for Future Fashion Factory and also the founder of non-profit Yorkshire Textiles. And then we have Diana Kakkar, who's CEO of garment manufacturer MAES London and UKFT Rise Ambassador. And then Graeme Raeburn, who is lead designer at Albion Cycles Performance London. Brilliant. So Suzy, unfortunately, we have a technical issue with Suzy's camera, which isn't her fault. It's just part of the demand for hopping today. And so we wanted to start the session on time. So we're going to go ahead. And if Suzy appears magically, that'd be great. If not, she's just going to be a blue circle. So Suzy, if you'll please introduce yourself.
Hi, the dreaded blue circle person. I'm so sorry. Yeah, I'm Suzy Shepherd. I'm the founder of Leeds Fashion Works and Yorkshire Textiles, and also I'm co-director of Future Fashion Factory. My interest is definitely across fashion and textiles, obviously, as the name suggests, and I'm particularly keen on working with young designers with some of the great iconic mills in Yorkshire. Is one of my particular interests.
Ready, me? Dawn, I think you're on mute.
Sorry. I'm just going to show some images of the collaborations that Suzy's been involved with for Future Fashion Factory. So just open up this window. So this is the first image, Suzy, is about Wool Week. If you just want to explain kind of some of the designers and the manufacturers that were involved in this, and then we'll lead on to Lee, who can talk about his involvement as a designer.
Okay, well, I think we did this as part of Campaign for All Wool Week, which is an international campaign, which most of you all know, and it was set up about 10 years ago. What's exciting about this in particular is that we were able to approach the mills and we wanted to follow the process through. So you can see we've got the knitwear, so we work with the yarn spinner Laxton's, we work with the mills on the other fabrics and the Joshua's cashmere. And then in the centre you'll see, this is the really interesting bit for me. We'd set up a project with Hainsworth for short runs, specifically for the fashion industry. So what we were looking to do, exclusive fabrics, not only a short run, but short runs that could have colour change as they're being done in very small runs. And this was the black and red. We used it as, to start off as a student project with School of Design in Leeds. And we also had the black and white. If anyone's been seeing all the films going through, it was in the black and white. This is the same cloth using the red and black wool. So we just wanted to try and do something that summed up the whole process of the textile industry from yarn to finished product. And the jacquard relates back to another project we did with Hainsworth using, jacquard punch cards. We digitized them and brought them back to life and then put those into the fabric design. So we were doing a bit of heritage meets innovation there.
Brilliant. Thanks, Suzy. Lee, do you want to introduce yourself, please?
Yes, I'm Lee. I'm a recent graduate from the Royal College of Art. I was the famous class of 2020. I've had experience working for international brands such as Iris Van Herpen and Christian Dior. And I've worked in a tailor, so that's sort of where my background came from. So I'm really interested in like traditional craftsmanship and kind of supporting British mills and working with sort of localized companies to build eco-conscious garments that are built to last, Yeah, what should I talk about the Hainsworth garment?
Yeah, I'll put these images up, please. So this is your Hainsworth
This is
garment.
kind of like a block that started with my Royal College of Art collection. I wanted sort of like a silhouette that was quite signature to me. So it's really about something that's really quite form-fitting, quite padded, and quite tailored. It's got about 14 different panels on, and the design was really to elevate the person, the wearer. So when you wear it, you just feel incredible because the cut of the garment is so sharp. It really hugs around the body and really makes the person's persona really come out, and it changes your posture, it changes the way you feel. The fabric that we use for that, I'd never actually used before because jacquard for me was always something quite different, sort of feels quite textural and embroidery wise, but this material was so lovely. It has like a great bounce to it, and it really added to the actual garment. So when you see it in person, it really hangs really beautifully and just has a sort of movement that goes about it, which I really like. And hopefully, Suzy will wear it eventually.
Yes.
Yeah. And then kind of off the back of that collaboration, Lee, I know you were asked to do another garment for Future Fashion Factory with Inui. So I don't think you want to talk a little bit about this project and working with the recycled fabric.
Yeah, I haven't even seen all of these images actually, so it's quite interesting for me to see them. But yeah, I got the message one day from John. He basically made a mill back in 2000, but he did mention to me that the world wasn't quite ready for recycled wool back then. But I think ever since demand of to be sustainable and to be really eco-conscious now has become more fashionable, a bit more prominent in the industry as demand shot up. So it was really quite interesting to me to know that these were once a load of jumpers just thrown away, and which he made into throws to be on a couch, and which I cut up and then eventually made it into a double-breasted women's wear tailored suit. It's quite beautiful, the cut of this as well, because it's quite sort of McQueen and Mugler inspired. So there's lots of interesting techniques on the inside, which you probably can't see, but it's cut quite severe and quite accurate, but also quite a relaxed fit. So it's incredibly comfortable, incredibly wearable, and it goes to show that you can put these recycled wool into any day ready to wear, really.
Brilliant, thank you. I think my hop-in has just had, are you still there? Still here. Okay. Let's just try that way. Brilliant, sorry. Diana, would you like to introduce yourself, please?
Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. I'm Diana. I'm the founder of MAES London. We are a high-end garment manufacturing studio in North London. I'm in my studio, which is very exciting because we are one of the few people through the pandemic who were allowed to come to work because we really can't work from home. We started 3 years ago in Hackney Wick in a small 520 square foot studio. And that was January 2018. And in January 2021, we moved to our new studio, which was 4,200 square foot. So it's massive. And sometimes it's hard for me to believe the growth that we've seen in the last 3 years as a UK manufacturer. I'm from India, so I didn't study here. I actually moved to London to study at RCA, and I just never ended up saving enough money to go through the application and start working, and I got a job within the UK industry. So I felt really lucky to be employed at that point of time because this was right after the recession. So my experience from India was with manufacturers, and then I moved to Australia, where I was working with other factories in the Far East Asia. So when I came to UK, I came rich with these supplier information, and designers just love that. So my job was to work with multiple designers and as a consultant around product development and garment tech, and then take it to factories overseas and produce it, because I could not find factories in the UK who could do things. So most of the Google searches was how to find a UK manufacturer, and it would never really lead to anything substantial. Or it would go on emails and I would never get replies back. So the easiest option was to take a flight overseas and develop the collection for most of the designers that we were working with. And most of the designers were runway designers or designers who were probably at the graduate fashion fund. So most of them were quite high-end designers anyway. And I saw a massive disconnect between the design process and the supplier relationship, because where I'm from in India, where I studied fashion, we had our manufacturers probably half an hour drive away. So if we were trying to resolve something technically, we could actually go to the factory or go to the mill and discuss what are the best solutions, so that it becomes part of the design process, rather than designing something, putting it out there and trying to actually find a solution after it's gone into production. And that was, for me, coming from India to UK, actually 5 steps backwards, because you would think you're surrounded by so much creativity, but that disconnect between supplier relationships was quite distinct. So I was in this really nice niche because I spoke the language overseas, had factory connections, and I took these creative concepts. I would go to the factories, I would launch samples with the factories and come back to UK saying, yep, everything is good. We should receive a sample within the next week. We will have a fitting, and then a sample would come back, and it was nowhere close to what we had launched. So there it was, not only our resources in terms of fabric, but the main resource that we're wasting was time. And forgetting about the flights and the hotel costs and the courier costs and the carbon footprint and all of that, I knew that there had to be an easier way, especially for a country which has so many creative designers. A country where, I moved to the UK to study fashion, so I couldn't believe that there was nothing easy out there for designers to find a solution. And it was a very broken communication channel. So that was the main focus, that we just want to make manufacturing easy for designers and become part of the design process rather than be at the end of the supply chain. So MAES London was started on the very, very simple notion that we will act as an extension of an atelier for designers. And my background has been in wovens. I have some background in Jersey with my factories overseas, but woven was something I was really passionate about. So we focused only on wovens. We created a niche in women's wear, and now we employ 20 people in our North London studio. We work with mostly designers who showcase at London Fashion Week, Paris Fashion Week, and Copenhagen Fashion Week. So we've got a few international designers across the pond. And I would probably say our, if there was a key to success or language to success, is coming from the fact that we speak the language of fashion more than necessarily just English as a language, but language of fashion. So when someone is coming to us, we actually go through the research of what their design stands for, and that try to cater solutions instead of just giving them a garment. Mindless garment.
Brilliant. I'm just going to show your images, Diana, because I think it really brings to life the space that you've created. So let me just open it. It's being slightly slower this afternoon.
No worries.
Here we go. So this is an amazing creative space, and I think
it's beautiful, beautiful studio. I'm so pleased, and we found it by sheer chance, really. And it's open plan. We've got 11-meter long table, and we cut both manually and with hand, depending on what we're working with, because sometimes we could be working on semi-couture pieces which need the handwork and craftsmanship. We've got dedicated lines both for sampling and production. And we wouldn't do, we're not a big manufacturer. We call ourselves micro factories because we work with designers who are mindfully producing and not really going in, or we don't have minimums, for example. So if you've been able to sell 12 units, we would produce those 12 units because someone has mindfully purchased those 12 units. And we are of the inherent belief that if a designer has gone through the effort of designing, developing, and put some pattern work, calico work, there's already carbon footprint gone into that design. That means the only way you can claw that carbon footprint back is by selling it. And also there's economic investment already for the designers. So we are totally of full belief that fashion has to be of commercial value, and how can we make that happen? And that's the solution-driven business that we are in.
Brilliant. And these are some of, I think, some of the garments that you've produced.
Yes, they are some of the most beautiful pieces, and really lucky to be working with designers who trust us with some of their really beautiful pieces. You might recognize that green outfit. One of the royalties wore it last year, and it was really, really popular. And yeah, it really, I consider myself really lucky to make a living out of doing something that I love. But not only just that, but out of making other designers' dreams come true. And I think that's really gratifying.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. And Graeme, I'm really interested for you to pick up actually from Diana, because I think your process and what you're going to talk about and show is a nice kind of follow on.
Absolutely fascinating, Diana. Really interesting to hear that. So thank you, Dawn. My name is Graeme Raeburn. I'm a designer of sportswear, probably coming up to 20 years experience now in sportswear and responsible sustainable design, where I look to optimize every aspect of the process to try and make things as durable, versatile, inclusive, to get as much utilization out of the garment, so that actually we're creating something, we're making it as best as possible. And in this case, really looking at the production side of things. So a concept, a working title called Paper to Production, that looks at the idea that if a young business, somebody working on the kitchen table, a student, wanted to scale their design. Somebody at the graduate show said, I'd love to order 10 of these, or something takes off online. How is that done? And this comes out of lots of frustrations at some of the barriers I've seen in place that prevents people working from end to end, from making one sample through to 1,000, say. And it's really interesting. I think we're a really interesting time now with accessibility of certain tools, networking, certainly digital tools. And in a lot of cases, I think what the current situation this last year has actually accelerated, because it certainly has been for me and in my previous role, what it enabled us to do actually some stuff remotely that probably we wouldn't have actually otherwise taken that plunge. So I've got a couple of slides to sort of explain this. I won't spend too long on this, don't worry, and pick out everything. But it's a very simple overview here of a concept on the left-hand side, where we're looking at a small-scale person working on paper, very hands-on, maybe making one-off sample. In the middle here is what I've just called card, where actually probably you're investing in some actual solid pattern pieces. And then finally on the end, you might have a digital pattern cutting system. Now, current experience, there's often barriers in between these things. There are reasons, scaling, costing, different types of technology that mean that it's harder to plug in. Sometimes volumes, working with a bigger factory, you might not actually have the volumes. So, and it just seems to me it's not a terribly well connected process at the moment. One thing an example of something I've seen as well is where actually a factory might do all of the development for a design, and they end up owning the IP. They own the patents. So that actually, if somebody did want to alter those or something like that, maybe take them and do their own sampling, they then have to pay a huge amount of money. So it's not the most efficient process at the moment. So on the next slide is an idea of a vision that might actually see the ability to traverse all of these areas and connect up using some actually quite accessible, quite low-fi interventions, meaning that the individual kitchen table producer could actually go on, figure out a system to own digital files, to innovate, to perfect something, and then actually plug it in completely finished to a factory. A factory might actually then also say to somebody, we're not quite sure about this, and you've submitted a CAD design or a flat piece of work or indicated on a photo kind of what's going on here. Actually, can you show us exactly what's going on? And you might be able to then integrate pattern work, maybe working on systems, and the individual then is able to retain control and take a lot of the responsibility for some of that early creative innovation work, and thereby using the actual expertise of a sample room, a professional sample room at a factory or further along the line, for exactly what it's needed for, is perfecting really high quality skilled production, rather than actually taking guesswork over a creative piece of design work. So I'm really excited now about what the current situation's opened up for us, and enabled now, I think, people working at distance. We actually were able to do this when my previous role at Raeburn, of having digital download patterns for people to create some quite simple off-cut animals from their home printer. So yes, I've probably said way too much now, but really passionate. It's super exciting time, I think, for us to work together as a network, as an industry.
Yeah, great. Thank you, Graeme and Diana. I think so much for us to pick up on. And I think maybe if we go back to kind of Lee and your experience just kind of as a graduate and coming into this industry and setting up your own brand, and everybody, I think this is a question to all the panel. How do you access manufacturing, and what are your barriers and frustrations? What would you like to see further support? I think the FFS facilitated a certain amount of relationship for you there, but now you're very much, I suppose, on your own.
Yeah, it was very much like that from the beginning, because I think during education we're always taught to kind of look into manufacturing methods and companies like that, and luckily I was quite self-sufficient when I was in education. When I was on the masters, I was always looking at who's out there, what fabric companies are making what, because I was mainly trying to get free fabric, to be honest. Messaging whoever, all these British mills and things, trying to get freebies, dead stock. That's how it came about Hainsworth originally, because they offer dead stock catalogue. You can buy things for a few meters, but to get samplings made and things like that, I have absolutely no idea. And every time I seem to message somewhere to do a sample, it's hundreds and hundreds of pounds for the slightest thing. Even if I wanted a seamstress to make some kind of mark, they'll be like, oh yeah, for that pair of trousers it's going to be £320. I don't have that. So it is quite difficult. I sort of wish there was a simple sort of database, even if it would just have literally the very basics. What companies do jersey, what companies do this, that, and the other. And you could just go there and contact them, whatever. I think also it'd be nice if there were mills, manufacturers, or even fabric companies that wanted to collaborate with young designers and maybe give them fabric scholarships, or want to collaborate, because at the end of the day, the young designers are the ones making the most exciting stuff, the most interesting things. So as it's a form of free promotion for them, and great promotion for the designer as well. So it'd be nice to sort of have a bit of a connection, rather than sort of be a bit. I think as a young designer, I feel a bit looked down on a little bit by a lot of big companies, which is quite difficult when you're starting out to try and blaggy right at the top.
Yeah, I mean, Graeme and Diana, I think your solutions, it's almost like you've gone through and you've had your experience and you've worked in industry, and that's what's led you to these solution points, really. And I wonder, we've got a question from Charles Ross, going back to when you first graduated and started to work with factories, what was the piece of advice that you ignored that experience has probably taught you most? Or maybe you didn't ignore any advice. Maybe there wasn't any advice given. I don't know. It'd be nice to see your point of view on that.
For me or Diana?
Oh, so for Graeme and Diana.
I'll jump in there very, very quickly. And I think it wasn't so much ignored, but I was unaware of the importance of material and fabric in the fabrication process, and to me it's such a critical part of learning about the materials that you're working with, the qualities, what they're good for, what they're not good for, how they might be repaired, designing for end of life and things like that. I think that's maybe something within fashion is less sort of important than the aesthetic sometimes. So I wish I'd learned more about that earlier.
Yeah. Diana?
I think I actually, when I graduated, I landed a job in garment tech. So I never really ended up working with a factory as a designer. But what I did realize was there's a lack and a gap in the knowledge about construction and ratings and fabric consumption, which when you're designing, that connect doesn't happen. So discussing whether adding a seam or not having a seam, is it going to affect you using 2 meters of fabric or 3.5 meters of fabric? And suddenly, that is money that you're actually saving towards your collection. So I think when I was studying fashion, and this is in India, which is a different world out there, we were so focused on the creative process and exploring techniques that we were slightly disconnected from the real world. But I don't know if that is the strategy that we want to kind of take for students, because it's a harsh reality as soon as you enter the industry and you're like, okay, you better get this sorted, otherwise you're spending way too much money on your fabric and you're actually not using 100% of the fabric. So people could be using 30 pounds a meter fabric and the usage could be 60%. That means you're actually not using 40% of your 30 pounds. And that wastage is not only just money lost, but it's also not environmentally sustainable, because these offcuts should be used into something. And I know, Graeme, you mentioned, but Raeburn has been really proactively using these offcuts, and there are other brands and in London where offcuts are being regenerated into either covers for diaries or pencil cases. So there has to be a movement around it, and knowing that every penny that you're investing in your fabric or raw materials, you're actually extracting it back and adding value to your garment.
Brilliant, thank you. Suzy, I wonder if you could talk a little bit from the manufacturing point of view with the Future Fashion Factory Wool Week collaborations. How hard or how easy is it to get mills to engage with young designers? And did they kind of give you any surprising feedback at the end of that project?
Well, we had fantastic feedback from both the designers and the mills themselves, because first of all, the designers were absolutely thrilled to get their hands on the cloth. They had a full choice of what they could have. So it was like, yes, I'll have the cashmere and have the this and that. So that was really great. But I think I have to admit, okay, there's a go-between here in that we were able to approach those mills and say, look, just give these guys some fabric and let them interpret it. And the mills were happy to do that. But I think some of the mills have probably got a structure that is more easily working around young designers. I know I was just hearing the end of one of the talks earlier, and Julie Roberts from Hainsworth was saying about how they try and connect with young designers through the universities. But there's so much expertise here in Yorkshire amongst the mills. It's everything from, the yarn right through to the finishing of the cloth and all those processes. And I think for me, I would love to see people coming through from university and newly established brands getting an understanding of what is involved, particularly with all the issues we're raising now about circularity and all those, as you know, Dawn, as we've been doing something recently. It's to bring all those issues together and have that input of a new designer coming along with totally fresh eyes and look at this and say, oh, what that maybe seem like a silly question, but actually say, well, why is it done like this? And could we do it like that? And why not? Because that's how you learn as you go along. And I think, and at the end of this, I think all the designers came away with an appreciation of the cloth and using it and the value of it. And I know what Diana's saying about how you would need to look at all those costs as you go along. But the added value of having something, say, with an iconic mill name on it, bearing in mind the mills in Yorkshire are internationally known. People can name mills in other parts of the world that they probably couldn't hear on the doorstep, but it's known. So they're supplying all those iconic brands. And so you're, in effect, getting a platform. If you're doing luxury garments, or like Lee doing bespoke as well, then I think if people know and appreciate this is Hainsworth cloth or whichever cloth it is, or Joshua Ellis cashmere, it's a name and it elevates straight away what you're doing, because it shows you're investing. You are not cutting corners, you're investing to make this end product that's going to have longevity. And I think this is something we've heard a lot today as well, Dawn, about how do you explain about longevity versus throwaway, if you like, and the price points and how we work around that. But though, on saying all that, I know Lee has worked with pieces that were recycled wool, then with some cut-offs of recycled wool pieces, and managed to make fabulous tailored jackets, which we're all admiring. So it is possible to get around that, whatever stage of your career you're at. But you've got to make those connections, and you've got to make those relationships with the mills and the right people. That's what it boils down to, those conversations, collaborations all the way.
Yeah, I mean, and it's not just access to cloth that is kind of the key barrier, I think, for SMEs and emerging designers. I think that's sampling and then communicating, scaling. And I think I'm really interested, Graeme and Diana, in how you're addressing that, how you're making, Graeme, sounds like you're developing a whole new process and also taking into account IP so that, you can take charge as a designer of that. And then Diana, after Graeme's responded, if you could maybe pick up on how you're scaling as a manufacturer, would be great.
I just back to what Suzy was saying there. I think that the network and the relationships thing is so important, and I think that is sometimes forgotten. These other professionals that you're working with, they're not just a factory. They're very, very skilled at what they're doing. They're not just a mill that are providing you with cloth. And so actually investing in those relationships is so important. And I think this comes back to this idea of if you are starting out, taking some of that responsibility on yourself, some of the risk, I think, which will also imply the ownership of the IP. In the early diagram, the biggest intervention is obviously digital, and the ability then to have a consistency of pattern or make or whatever process, and that's not to say that you lose sight of the hands-on, the craft, because it is so intrinsically important that we're working with our hands and working 3 dimensions on these things. But figuring out what that balance is, when you can then plug into a factory, work with a partner, and then actually take some of this responsibility between you the right way, and in order that you as a small business can grow. To give an example, I forgot to say, actually, I inadvertently have become a micro factory myself here. A kind of a casual comment early in the year, in January, meant I actually something grew. I thought I was going to make 5 of something. It actually grew. I ended up making about over 100 of something for a cycling community. and it's actually meant that I've now done a Mark II of it that I will be producing with a factory, where I can then send them a fully finished sample. I can send them digital files of the pattern. I've worked with the material. I've solved all the problems. Fantastic. We'll order 1,000 next season. So it's been a really interesting experience being completely immersed in this experience and building the relationship with the factory.
Brilliant. Thank you, Graeme. Diana, do you want to add?
Yeah, everyone here is on the same page, which I think is really, really key. And it just means that this message just needs to be broadcasted to the public. And when we're talking about the fabric, and I think, Suzy, you're really right on point that some of the most beautiful fabrics we work from come from UK. And but the cost of those fabrics that end up on the garment and the handling of the fabric, I always say that if you're driving a Tesla, you're not going to park it in a open parking yard overnight in any rogue part of London. So if you are working with beautiful fabrics, you need to work with a luxury manufacturer or someone who really knows the skill to handle the fabric. Because if they're going to be mishandling the fabric, that's all your money in your fabric gone, and raw material is the best and the first pillar of everything. And that's why MAES is seam spelled backwards, because we really truly believe that we have to start from the first step. And if you get the first step right all the way through, then you're going to get everything right. We were talking about the collaborations, and that's something that we quite proactively work with our designers. In fact, when we're working with our designers, there's limited information that we can work, but the best partnership that we have formed with designers is where the conversation is bilateral. That means that whatever we are working on, we are actually solving some of the problems that they probably didn't see. And I think, Graeme, you would be my perfect client, because if you're already resolving all the problems and giving it to me, that means we can actually work efficiently. And working efficiently is cost savings for the designer, because we want to make manufacturing in UK accessible. And hearing Lee's comment about £325 for a pair of trousers, that doesn't alarm me, because by the end of the day, once you start calculating the wages, the rent, the overheads of a factory, especially for a factory like us in London, and we're choosing to be in London because we want to attract the creative crowd. But of course, if we move out of London, we're going to be paying cheaper rent, but we won't be approaching as many designers as we are doing right now. So it's a conscious decision. All of these things are adding costs to the designers. And it's a dilemma, because we want to make it accessible and we want to make it approachable, but there's a cost associated with it. And I was on one of the main stages earlier, and Patrick Grant mentioned this, that there is not enough financial resources for manufacturing in the UK. So if there are enough financial funding for manufacturing, then I would love to support a designer in the making and produce their collection so that they can do the first collection, get it in the stores, get them on the platform, because that means we are growing with them. But we are a self-funded business, and I put my eyes in this business. So I'm watching every penny that is going. And even I have my colleagues having to stop me saying, okay, you can't do mates rates on this. I know you believe in the product, but you just can't keep doing that, because this is your money. And at the end of the year, I'm answerable not only to my accountant, but my 15 to 20 people who depend on me for their, everyday livelihood. So I'm in this dilemma, because we're self-funded, we're not looking for investment because we don't need it as yet. We are self-sufficient in that way. But if we did get an investment to support designers like Lee, who is consciously choosing to produce in UK, choosing to use UK fabrics, then it's a win-win, because it's a perfect case study for us to say that something built here is built to last. But it has to work for Lee financially. It has to work for us financially. And it almost feels as if there's another layer that we haven't cracked.
Yeah. Really interesting. Thank you, Diana. I'm going to have to go to, we've got some questions in the audience. I apologise. They've been sat there for a little while. We only have 5 minutes, and then I would like to ask you for a final thought. So the first one is towards you, Diana, and they do bring up the B word, which is probably why I've just left them to the end. Sorry to ask. It's okay, Dom. But with your experience, Diana, working across so many territories, how do you think Brexit's going to affect the UK fashion industry in the long term?
I think it will be, when we say the UK fashion industry, I'm going to focus on UK fashion manufacturing because that's where I'm targeted towards. I think it will be for the good. I am a true optimist, and I believe that this is a time when people are actually starting to think. I think COVID has made people think about their values and think about things that they're doing, and suddenly businesses are becoming much more purpose driven than ever before. And since World War II, this is the first thing which has united the whole world, and the whole world is talking about one thing and one thing only, it's COVID. And suddenly businesses are looking inwards and thinking about, what can I do to make a difference, and how can I be more lean? And one of the things which is coming up quite often is, how can I support onshoring of businesses? Why do I need to go overseas? And what's the carbon footprint of every garment that I'm producing? So there is a massive opportunity for UK manufacturers at this point of time. We have to be aware that fabric is coming from overseas, but I'm not going to bore you with the customs, but if you look into it, it is still working in our favor to be able to get fabric from overseas, produce it in UK, and distribute it in UK. So massive opportunity. Don't think the cost will go down. We will probably produce and sell locally, which is a good thing for everyone involved.
Yeah, brilliant. And I suppose it's an opportunity for us to look at our UK supply chains. And I suppose in terms of manufacturing, this is a sneaky question before I go to Tom's final one. But I mean, do you think we need investment in manufacturing?
100%. And that investment is not just for the manufacturing, it's for the whole fashion industry. Again, I'm going to quote Patrick on this because he was talking about getting this machine which does welt pockets, right? And getting that machine is really expensive, and I wouldn't be able to buy that machine because I don't have enough orders to get a welt pocket. So by the time I invest in that machine, I need to offset that cost. So only if the demand in the UK industry for certain things kind of start growing, then we have the facility to buy these machines, set them up here, and then start saving the cost back to the designers. It is costing us more here because we are making a welt pocket by hand compared to some of the overseas factories who would have a welt pocket which is done within 3 seconds instead of actually stitching it, making the corners, folding it back, pressing it down. So it's one of those things that has to work, and that investment has to come in talking about choosing to use UK manufacturers, UK suppliers, and the demand has to grow from there.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you. So this question is to you all. Will Brexit dent or strengthen the relationships between individual creatives and companies? I suppose companies, we mean manufacturers for this session. I don't know if anybody wants to go first.
That's a complicated question. That's a tough one.
You've got 60 seconds. So.
60 seconds, I would say, I think that for small luxury design brands, if they can manage within that, and I mean, it's a relatively narrow field, to work with UK manufacturers, to work with the mills, because that fabric from the mills is going out internationally anyway. You know, they're supplying all the big international luxury brands, and people will understand, hopefully, the value in that. And if that message gets across to the public, which sounds very corny, you know, buy better, buy less, and all that sort of thing, those skills and it will grow. And suddenly, I think funding might start to magically appear when that can be shown to happen here.
Great. Does anybody else want to add anything to Suzy's?
Yeah, I think that there's probably, I'd like to think, a time now when we can, back to Suzy's word, value there, the value of clothing, the value of people who are involved in the supply chain, and really respecting that. I think we're obviously in a slightly rarefied space here, but thinking about some of the mass production things, unfortunately, I think we do need some legislation to come in, because actually they're not going to do that independently off their own back, no matter how many greenwash kind of things come out of it. So I do think that we're in a really interesting time to accelerate and make these values relevant again.
Yeah, brilliant. Thank you, Graeme and Suzy, for those comments. I have just one final thought from all of you, really, in terms of closer kind of connections and collaborations and communication with manufacturer and designer. What do you think is needed to increase that moving forward? We've got 5 minutes before we get kicked out, so we'll use our time up.
I think perhaps, Dawn, it's understanding the system. Often young designers say to me, well, where do I get this cloth? And these sometimes are designers in Yorkshire and don't always know how to connect with the mills. I think people need to do some homework, perhaps, and Graeme said this, the value of those relationships. It's not just about how much is this cost, how long will it take, can you work, do they know where you're coming from as a designer? And I think that's why some of the mills have been particularly successful with the younger design brands, because they've had the capacity and the time to deal with those young designers. And I think for me, that coming through, and the mills are known internationally, but our British young design brands are also revered internationally as well, and we must remember that.
Brilliant, thanks, Suzy.
I can cover one point. I think as I mentioned, when I was looking for manufacturers, finding a UK manufacturer seemed to be really hard, but finding UK designers is really easy. So manufacturers know where to go to find designers, and quite often clients would come in and ask, who are the designers that we're working with? Because it almost felt that my reputation depended on the designers that I'm working with. I think there needs to be a conversation who are the manufacturers they're working with, so that there's a support and limelight going on to the suppliers as true partners. So people start talking about manufacturing actually being around here and sharing resources. And that will also create that kind of traceability and the transparency amongst designers, where the end customer will actually know that this garment was made in a nice place, in a good factory, paying good wages, not evading tax, not doing anything dodgy. And if we've ever had a reason to do that, like having looked at what was happening in Leicester last year was shocking. For me, I couldn't actually believe that this was happening in the UK, because we have to remember that I'm not from here. So thinking that that's happening in the UK was a big personal shock in the industry, that people were treated the way they were. And that makes factories like us look expensive. But actually, we are fair. And we have to question why something is actually costing the way it is costing. And that has to start with awareness.
Brilliant, thank you. Graeme, I know you were going to say something if you want to. Hopefully we have time, but if you disappear, I'm sorry, because I'm running into the minute.
No, I was just catching on the transparency, accountability, the honesty. I think there's a responsibility of people with experience to pass on some of that knowledge and encourage people coming into the industry whom it might be a bit unfamiliar, because it's very complex. There's a lot of things that need to join together. So I think things like this, like Future Fashion Factory, is brilliant to connect that knowledge, and exactly the young fresh designers coming through with great ideas are able to accelerate quicker and nourish the entire industry.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I'm going to wrap up now, because I don't want you all to just get kicked out without me saying thank you very much for your time and all your great comments and discussion points. I think it's to be followed up maybe at the next symposium, or maybe on Twitter. Everyone stay connected.
Thank you, John.
Thank you very much. Nice to see
Thank
you
you
all.
very much,
Bye.
Dawn.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye, everyone. Catch you later. Bye.